And he looked at me and he said, Bill, now you know. Once you've seen, you can't unsee that this transcendental realm feels more fundamental, more real, more basic than the state of consciousness we're in right now. Yeah. And he was so excited. I can still remember how, like, he burst into my, this is what I saw, yeah.
That's right.
That's how he got fired, yeah. So the present moment, as in Buddhism, opens up that in the middle of the present moment is a portal to the eternal. It's not just before we're born and after we die. Here and now. Wake up. You are a spiritual being.
All right. Hello. All right, Dr. Bill Richards. It's I already told you this when I came in, but just for the video, this is absolutely a dream come true. I read your book about 2 years ago, and I had always dreamed about running into you and asking you for an interview. So when it finally happened, it definitely didn't feel real. But so introduce yourself. What is your career? What are you most proud of?
Oh, it's good to be with you, Matt. Who knows what words are going to tumble out of my mouth here? What am I most proud of? I'm not sure that's even career. Just living and loving my two sons and going through the adventure of life, period. The psychedelic chapter of my life, if you want to look at that, goes back to when I was 23 years old at the University of Göttingen in Germany, where I volunteered for an experiment with some drug I had never heard of called psilocybin. And that led to volunteering in the clinic there in Germany, where the drugs were still legal, and English-speaking people hoped to have a session before they went back to the United States, where they were getting more controversial. And then I returned to the United States and completed a couple master's degrees in theology and psychology of religion and so on. Helped a little bit with some research in Boston. But then I was offered a job as a psychedelic therapist in Baltimore. This was, 1967. And Spring Grove Hospital Research Department had 2 federal grants from the National Institutes of Health. One using LSD in the treatment of alcoholism, and one for hospitalized, depressed, personality disordered people. And also, we were just starting the work with psychedelics to help cancer patients live more fully, in conjunction with Sinai Hospital here in Baltimore. And that sounded exciting to me, so my wife, who was a psychiatric nurse, and I moved to Baltimore to Spring Grove Hospital Center. And I pursued research in that context for 10 years, from 67 to 77, all kinds of different studies with normal, healthy volunteers, religious professionals and mental health professionals, and also people suffering from alcoholism and narcotic addiction and depression of different forms. And during that, I became a certified clinical psychologist and got to write letters after my name. I had a PhD. All the other letters didn't count. So I did that. During that period, the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center came into being, and I watched its construction and helped be part of the staff that launched it. It was a big, beautiful research facility dedicated essentially to psychedelic research with everything you could wish for: sensory isolation chambers, biochemical labs, animal research, psychedelic treatment suites with their own private bath and kitchenettes, and library and auditorium, and state-paid positions for the staff to fill the center, which made me a state employee then. Had a little more job security instead of being grant dependent. And I remember us sitting around our big conference table in maybe 1999, 2000, about 1990. Yeah. But debating how we were going to train all the slews of psychedelic therapists who would be needed in a couple of years. This was about 1970. Let me get my dates straight. But anyway, clearly President Nixon announced that Timothy Leary was the most dangerous man in America, and people in Maryland were saying, why are we using Maryland taxpayers' money to give people LSD? And the research center essentially folded. It was transferred to the University of Maryland from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and the administrators decided that psychedelic research was just too controversial, and they eliminated the whole clinical sciences division, including my job. So then came the great 22-year period of dormancy, where it looked like psychedelic research had died. And then in 1999, with Roland Griffiths and the cheering of Bob Jesse in the background, we were able to restart psychedelic research at Hopkins. And it has gone there now from a staff of 3 of us to over 65 in the Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research. And then I am also working now at the Aquilino Cancer Center with sunstone therapies, specializing in applying psychedelic therapy to end-of-life issues. So that's a lot of words, but that's the brief outline.
One thing that I didn't know until I read your book was pretty surprising to learn is that, you figure that, the research didn't end until 1977. You would have imagined that it would have ended at 1970 when it all became illegal, and that it didn't end necessarily because of the prohibition, but because that funding dried up.
That's right. Yeah, even in 1977, when I gave psilocybin to the last cancer patient, it was fully legal, fully supported by the FDA. Though we were the only site that was allowed to continue, many others were closed down, perhaps because we had federal grants, including one for narcotic addiction for part of that time. Maybe we were close to Bethesda and they could keep an eye on us. I don't know what the reason was, but Yeah, what stopped psychedelic research definitively was not the federal government. It was the administrators in the psychiatry department at the University of Maryland who just decided this potato is just too hot, you know.
Now, I have to imagine that even after you first participated in that study in Germany, I doubt immediately afterwards you had any idea that your career would go this way. At what point did you start considering that this is what your life would be, that you would pursue, a career in psychedelic research?
Yeah, the term psychedelic researcher didn't even exist, you know. So I hadn't heard the word psychedelic yet, you know.
Because at that time it was still considered to be psychotomimetics. That is, they mimic.
Yeah, the Hans Karl Leuner, the psychiatrist in charge of the psychotherapy division of the Department of Psychiatry in Göttingen, had just written a monograph, very glossy, expensive thing called the Experimental Psychose, the Experimental Psychoses. And the hope was that these drugs, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline especially, would help us understand psychosis better. Because when they gave it, especially in high dosage, people often had panic disorders and became paranoid and so on. And that was before the importance of preparation in a supportive setting, as we call it now, was recognized. They would just give the drug and watch and see what happened. And some people had wonderful experiences and some had terrifying experiences. And
when they gave it to you, I mean, it was a pretty cold clinical room, it didn't have any sort of furnishings, or wasn't necessarily the ideal setting for an experience.
Absolutely not. That. No, it was a little basement room with just room for a cot, an end table, and a chair. And there was a little narrow window looking out over the hospital garbage cans, I remember. And they gave me an injection of psilocybin, short-acting derivative called CZ74, and left me alone. And then checked in on me periodically. And it's interesting that under those circumstances I had such a profound revelatory experience. I attribute it in part to the low dosage and my maybe readiness to have a spontaneous experience at that point in my life.
At the same time,
and also my kind of Methodist piety of my childhood, that I had heard that I might experience some insights into my Oedipal complex or my early childhood, and that God would be with me if I had to experience any earth-shaking insights, So I was kind of open and curious, but also choosing to trust my mind. Then, from my book, the story of how these exquisite geometric, multidimensional patterns, neon-like, opened up, and I felt I could move through them, and all of a sudden, what we call mystical consciousness prevailed, and I was one very awestruck 23-year-old, because I didn't even know that was a possibility.
Yeah, no, I imagine, because it must have been surprising, considering that while you did have some preparation with your upbringing, there was no preparation in terms of set and setting.
That's right.
And I know that not only was it unexpected, the next couple experiences didn't get you anywhere close to that.
That's right.
And until your next experience with this, you had started to doubt yourself in the experience, wondering if you had exaggerated it or something. But then, of course, thanks to your friend and colleague Walter Pankey, suggested doing a slightly higher dose, and that did the trick. It puts you right back in that state. And
the original research project was comparing CZ74 and CEY19 in 2 dose levels randomly. And in the first so I kind of signed up for 4 drug administrations. That was the structure of the research project. And the first one was this mystical breakthrough, but the next 3 were non-mystical. They were interesting, even though the dose was a little higher for 2 of them. Kind of philosophical rumination, but nothing transformative, magnificent, revelatory. And so at the end of that 4th session, I was wondering if I had been gullible, if I had overestimated what happened that first time. Maybe what I called spiritual enlightenment was just a wonderful form of sexual pleasure or something, And that's when Wally Pankey came through and we met in the clinic. And I told him the story, and he suggested to Dr. Lerner, let's give Bill Richards 1 more session and raise the dose a bit and take him out of the basement into a room with some plants and light, and we're going to use music. And let me be with him in case he would like a hand to hold sometime. And when we did that, this 5th session occurred that was so profound that I have never doubted the validity of it since. Yeah.
So, you mentioned your Methodist upbringing. I want to discuss that a little bit. Every question, or a big question that every child is asked growing up is, of course, what do you want to be when you grow up? And as you said when I came in, is you're still kind of waiting to find out who you're going to be when you grow up.
I'm only 84. Who knows what I'll be when I grow up?
But I know that by 7th grade, you wanted to be a minister, and which is a little surprising to me. First off, just at 7th grade, I had no idea what I wanted to be. So to even kind of have an inkling of what you wanted to do, how certain were you that was the path you were going to take? Even if you weren't necessarily going to be a minister, did you have a good sense that you were going to have a religious career of some sort?
Well, let's go back to 6th grade, 5th grade. I had an incredible chemistry laboratory. My father had been, or was, a high school chemistry physics teacher. And I had all the chemicals in my own laboratory to do the junior high school chemistry course, and I did it, I used to invite my friends over to make hydrogen in the evening. It's great. So I really enjoyed science. And I remember I even memorized all the atomic numbers. I didn't know what to do with them. I think I was just trying to impress my dad, but I could tell you what I probably still can tell you most of them, I didn't memorize the atomic weights, though. It's a little too much. And then I also was really excelling in music. I was playing very difficult music, especially Chopin and the like. And so I was kind of, should I be a professional musician or should I be a great scientist? It had to be a great scientist, And in the middle of that, I went to a Methodist church camp, which was lots of fun. And they have this commitment night. And I remember just feeling an intuitive sense of what they called being called to the ministry. Um, and that sense of identity stayed with me throughout high school and college. Frankly, I didn't doubt it till I arrived at the Yale Divinity School. But I know I valued the religious dimension. I wanted to work with people. I cared about people. And I had some intuitive sense of the reality of a sacred dimension of life. Not in a samadhi Eastern way that did open up with the psychedelics, but the beauty of God in nature, the value of every human being, the fighting for social justice, the expression of the sacred in music, that type of stuff, just felt very congruent.
Yeah.
So I arrived at the Yale Divinity School with a focus in the pastoral ministry. And at the end of the first year, I was less sure that was where I wanted to go. Yale at that time was very intellectually oriented rather than experientially oriented. And I was more interested in religious experience. And then I had the opportunity to do my second year in Germany, which was exactly the break I needed. In the German university, it's structured differently. You don't register for courses. You just show up in any course you like. And if you show up enough, the professor testifies that you were there. He signs your Studienbuch. And I found all the exciting stuff to me, or much of it, happening in the Department of Medicine, in the Department of Psychiatry. They had courses in the religious delusions of schizophrenic patients, and there was a course called Psychopathology of Religion. There was a course in psychosomatic medicine. There was a big auditorium of medical students learning meditation called autogenic training, a form of self-hypnosis. And so I really found the experiential dimension of religion in the School of Medicine. And I wasn't especially interested in learning Hebrew and Greek and the fine nuances of biblical interpretation, even though some of the great professors were there and I sat in on their classes. So then I returned to Yale for the third year of the Master of Divinity degree. And Yale had different specializations, like pastoral ministry and chaplaincy and so on. And they had one called Teaching and Research in Religion. And I thought that was more congruent to who I was becoming. So my degree from Yale was in Teaching and Research in Religion rather than pastoral ministry. And then I went on to study psychology of religion and comparative religions, and then finally moved into clinical psychology. So I became a licensed psychologist as well as a scholar of religion, I guess.
Now, speaking about comparative religion, how important was it to you to have a wide overview of the different religions? I mean, for instance, I know that you say you went to Yale Divinity School because you quote wanted an interdenominational seminary as opposed to a purely Methodist seminary, and that Yale University had people from all different faiths and even world religions, and that you knew you wanted a broader framework for your life and studies. So yeah, I mean, how important was it to you to study that kind of stuff?
Yeah. When I came back from Germany, I took a description, excuse me, of one of my most profound psychedelic experiences to the head of psychology of religion to share it with him. And he read it. And his response was to give me an article full of statistics to critique, to prove I could still think rationally. And I did pass the test. But he was embarrassed. He didn't like religious experience. His specialty was how theological students tended to have unresolved Oedipal complexes and were very tied to their mothers. It's his right to study whatever he wanted, but it wasn't what psychology of religion meant to me. And then I took the same description to my professor of Hinduism, Norvin Hine, who just died at 103 a few years ago. Tall, handsome Indian guy. And he read the same description. And he looked at me and he said, "Bill, now you know." And that has always stayed with me, you know.
Yeah, I love what you said to me when I first met you, that once you see, you can't unsee.
Yeah, that's Jeremy Narby's line in one of the films. Once you've seen, you can't unsee. That this transcendental realm feels more fundamental, more real, more basic than the state of consciousness we're in right now.
Yeah. Because one thing that really blew me away was that, I came to a lot of this stuff intellectually. It wasn't that I had some big experience when I was very young that led me down this path. I had started studying, philosophy and world religions and hearing about the possibility that you could have this unitive, non-dual experience. And to me, it made a lot of sense. I kind of figured intellectually that the only thing that was separating, the only reason why I felt like I was in here and the world was out there was my mind, was, just thoughts. That was the only thing really separating me from it. And that if I could really look at the world right, then I would feel that unitive oneness with everything. And but it took years of searching and many different experiences to finally come to that point. But so that brings me to I'm a pretty big fan of perennial philosophy, which is the idea that all of the major world religions either come from the same source or in fact say the same thing. Of course there are many superficial differences when you compare them, but to use an analogy, if you go around the world, everyone dresses differently, everyone eats different food, everyone lives in different style of houses, but at the end of the day, on a deeper level, everyone likes to dress nicely, everyone likes to eat good food, everyone's houses has 4 walls and a roof.
Everyone has 2 lungs.
Yeah.
Everyone has 1 heart.
And so in a similar way, when you look at maybe not the metaphysical teachings of the real religions, but certainly the ethical teachings of them, they really do all say the same thing, to not just love our neighbor, but to love our enemies, to treat everyone as you would like to be treated, to tell the truth, to not kill or steal, to be generous. Whether you call it Christ consciousness or the Buddha nature, there is, I believe, an absolutely fundamental realization which anyone can reach, even the scientifically minded, that everyone, not just all humans, but all of life is essentially one big extended family. That we are all brothers and sisters in Christ, or the children of God, however you want to put it. That essentially that the religious literature is, to me, it doesn't represent scientific, literal truth, but they are, allegorical, mythical, spiritual truths, and that the literature is really just poetry to find words to describe an indescribable, experience.
One of the common insights of these profound unitive states is the what the Hindus call the bejeweled net of Indra, But it's this concept that within consciousness, in the great unity, we're all interrelated. We're all connected. We all belong, almost, if you can picture this, infinite design, sort of like a incredibly beautiful Islamic dome in a mosque, of all these patterns and energy flowing through them, and they're connecting, and like that's a model of the spiritual world, and we all participate in that. We're all in Western. We call it the. We used to call it the Brotherhood of Man, but with the women's movement now we'll call it the unity of mankind, or of humanity. Get rid of the word man in there, but that we all really are interconnected. And when we think we're isolated, lonely, we're really deluded. We've fallen asleep. We need to wake up, But the real reality is the bejeweled net.
No, absolutely. That is one of my favorite images or kind of maps of the world. And for the audience, if they're not aware, the common imagery for Indra's net is that everyone is essentially like a crystal, a diamond, and when you look into those crystals, what you see is every other diamond in the net reflected into it. And again, these are things that rationally, made a lot of sense to me before I even had any experience that approached this kind of thing. Where I just think about it, and it's like I didn't create the language that I speak in or think in. I did not create the concepts that come up when I am thinking. That everything within my consciousness is just a reflection of the greater world outside of it. That really, if I am anything, that I'm just kind of this inflection point between the inner and outer worlds.
Mm-hmm.
But
beautiful thoughts.
Yeah, no, and
a big contribution this field makes to the study of comparative religion is the recognition that in the many strata of alternate states of consciousness, if you will, that we can access with psychedelics, there are archetypal visionary states of mind where the ego, the everyday self, is still intact and is looking, beholding, loving, learning, relating to something in us, what philosophers call a subject-object dichotomy framework, that all people, whether Eastern or Western, can experience that. And then there also are these experiences of union, of the drop of water of the Atman merging with the ocean of Brahman. And that happens to both Eastern and Western people. Even the same person, if you give a series of psychedelic sessions, for example, can experience a vision of the Christ or Kuan Yin or the Virgin Mary or whatever in that realm of imagery, which can be incredibly meaningful and profound, that we used to call Western mysticism. And then the same person can also experience the great unity. It's what we used to call Eastern mysticism, But they're not two different cultures. They're two different experiences within the human psyche, available to both people who are born in the East and people who are born in the West.
And yeah, and then one of the also incredible things about that is not only is it available to everyone, it's not only, of course, available through psychedelics.
That's right.
that, as I asked you when I first met you, it really seems as if these experiences are not within the chemicals. They're within us. They are doorways that are already there. And, some people, the door can be blown open with a slight breeze, and some other people, they have these doors firmly, shut up. But that there are many, paths up the mountain, not just, you can not only reach these states through, of course, psychedelics, which it's incredible how reliably,
That's right.
Psychedelics produce these experiences, but also through meditation, prayer, Sufi dancing, through, attending a Bach concerto in a beautiful Gothic cathedral. That it really seems like all of the different religious practices that have evolved over time are just ways of opening the doors.
Definitely.
For people.
Definitely. They're different facilitators, different tools, but the experiences are not. With psychedelics, in the psychedelic, it's in the human mind.
Yeah.
And, there are people who encounter these experiences completely spontaneously without ever wanting them or looking for them. They're, boop, in the middle of the night, there it is, or sometimes women in the middle of natural childbirth will have this dimension of experiencing, for example. It's absolutely revelatory. So there's no question that good atheists can have profound spiritual experiences.
So yeah, and that brings me to there's essentially two views that we can take about these kind of experiences, which you term in your book the constructivist view and the perennial view. The constructivist view being that these experiences become from essentially a heightened version of the placebo effect, that because of our cultural background and our expectations, that's what leads us to it, versus the perennial view that, again, these experiences are already within us, all of these archetypes, essentially, pointing to what Jung would call the collective unconsciousness. And, one of the biggest pieces of evidence for the fact that, this isn't just a product of expectations is that, again, Easterners can experience Christ, Westerners can experience Hindu gods, often without any, again, foreknowledge. I mean, for instance, in your book, you describe one young man's experience. This young man was from a poor area of inner Baltimore. He had dropped out of school before he'd even reached high school, had a history of heroin addiction and incarceration, and was at that time living in a halfway house. But, he came in for this LSD experience to see if, he could help with, I suppose, recidivism and, see if it could, cure his addiction. And in his experience, he encountered, quote, strange, partially naked figures dancing with funny hats like crowns on their head. It seems like he really didn't know what to make of it until a few days later when he happened to page through a book of Hindu art that you had in the waiting room, and he found the imagery that he encountered and came running in, pointing to a picture of, Shiva dancing, saying, this is what I saw.
And he was so excited. I can still remember how, he burst into my, this is what I saw, yeah.
No, and
so how did the dancing Shiva get into the mind of the deprived narcotic addict? Yeah.
Absolutely. And as someone who studied the literature, when you look into this stuff, this is, again, not a rare occurrence, but this is
That's right.
pretty common. But and so this also points to a fact that I think anyone with a background in science can agree upon, especially nowadays with what we understand about psychology, is that John Locke's idea of that we're a tabula rasa, blank slate, is just completely dead wrong.
Yeah.
Again, that
I wish we could give John Locke a good psilocybin session. Yeah, he totally underestimated who we are.
No, and and speaking to that brings me to we were discussing Houston Smith before this all started. one of my favorite quotes from him, describing a mescaline trip he had. He says, "The world into which I was ushered was strange, weird, uncanny, significant, and terrifying beyond belief. Plotinus's emanation theory and its more detailed Vedantic counterpart had hitherto been only conceptual theories for me. Now I was seeing them, with their descending bands spread out before me. I found myself amused, thinking how duped historians of philosophy had been in crediting the originators of such worldviews with being speculative geniuses." And this is my favorite line out of the whole thing. "Had they had experiences such as mine, they need have been no more than hack reporters. But beyond accounting for the origin of these philosophies, my experience supported their truth. As in Plato's myth of the cave, what I was now seeing struck me with the force of the sun, in comparison with which everyday experience reveals only flickering shadows in a dim cavern. How could these layers upon layers, these worlds within worlds, these paradoxes in which I could be both myself and my world, and an episode being both momentary and eternal, how could such things be put into words?" Which,
I knew Houston Smith quite well. I would call him one of my primary mentors, and I was never his student, but we were friends.
Yeah.
And he never forgot that experience.
And that's also, I mean, God, you've not just had a incredible career, but it's incredible the people you've been able to meet, throughout it. I believe Abraham Maslow was one of your advisors in college.
I was Abraham Maslow's research assistant for a year at Brandeis University. And of all the professors I had in graduate schools, he was the only one where I just wanted to sit at his feet and listen.
Yeah.
Abe was I would call him a Jewish mystic. Yeah. He never took psychedelics. He had a very acute heart condition, actually. Died jogging when he was only 62. So it seemed unwise for him to risk intense emotion of any kind, especially right after Larry and Alpert had been fired and so on. But he was very interested in psychedelics, and my job was to keep him informed on the latest research in psychedelics.
And also, of course, he had a natural just belief in the importance and significance of peak experiences, of course.
Yes.
Without, of course, doing any psychedelics.
He coined the term peak experience and the further reaches of human nature and all that, and interviewed people like Albert Einstein and Eleanor Roosevelt, who spontaneously had these experiences and valued them. Yeah.
And now, speaking of Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, I know you actually had a chance to go to Millbrook when they were still there, and I believe you met Timothy Leary. You didn't get a chance to meet Richard Alpert. Obviously, you became Ram Dass.
Yeah.
You did?
Oh, yeah. I knew him before he was Ram Dass.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
What was your impression of them? Obviously, they went a lot more unorthodox route, with this stuff.
Yeah, I write about that a little in my book. I mean, Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, Dick, and Ralph Metzner, I mean, they're individual human beings, and none of them are saints or geniuses. They're just living their lives as best they can. Timothy didn't have any advanced training in religion, but he had this incredibly profound spiritual experience. He was trying to figure out what to do with it. As he said, he learned more about the human mind in one experience with, was it LSD or mescaline? I forget what.
Mushrooms,
or mushrooms, than he had in all his years of graduate school.
No, that's a famous quote, absolutely.
And But he was also a struggling human being. He had a wife who committed suicide. Was trying to raise 2 kids. He was,
Yeah.
And Millbrook, when I arrived there, was after Larry and Alpert had left Harvard, and the next year. And it was a gathering of very interesting people, really, yeah. And there was some serious thought going on, like people like Houston Smith and Walter Houston Clark and so on would come and give seminars in the weekends. And that's when I would often drive up there from New Haven and join them. I call it in my book a secular ashram that needed a good stern abbot, and it didn't have one. But there was some serious scholarship going on there,
Yeah. No, I would definitely say that one of the main marks of Timothy Leary's just life was definitely that inner turmoil and struggle. One of his main influences was Socrates, and he definitely had that Irish rebel in him, and a little bit too much. I think that he definitely was, I don't know if trying to be, but just ended up being that, man versus the system. He needed that greater thing to struggle at, and he didn't reach that kind of point of that I think Ram Dass kind of reached of kind of transcending that dualistic point of view. I think one of the best things that exemplifies the difference between those two personalities is, they're giving a lecture on a stage, and Timothy Leary was talking about how he had been in over 40 jails across 4 continents. And then Ram Dass says, they still haven't busted me. He never went to jail for it. And again, I think that was part of his rebellious.
Yeah. In all fairness, I think Timothy did try to do the academic routine well. He was a lecturer at Harvard. He had written a book, The Interpersonal Diagnoses of Personality. He did some very challenging research with psychedelics, with quantifying the psilocybin experiences of a large number of people and publishing it in the Journal of Mental Disease, if I remember right. He did some very interesting research trying to rehabilitate young prisoners. And so let's give him credit for what he did. But then he reached a point of kind of giving up on the academic world and hanging out with movie stars instead, and that's when he got all the sensationalistic publicity, and he became kind of an icon of a rebellious age.
Yeah, no, it's pretty incredible to see how, on the one hand, he obviously was getting a deep message from it, but at the same time, I feel like he slightly, lost the plot when, of course, he famously said, turn on, tune in, and drop out. Yeah. And, if you're talking about, like, that is one of the fundamental insights of, say, like the Bhagavad Gita is do your duty, but don't be attached to the result. But the thing is do your duty first. Of course, after he says, drop out, he says, drop out of college, drop out of work and stuff. And which absolutely I think is, a misguided thing that, you can be in the world, but not of the world.
That's right.
And so I like what you say that it should really have been, turn on, tune in, and drop in,
Right. Care about the world and the culture.
Yeah.
Transform it from within. And, but I think Timothy was also saying drop out of the, just trying to make more money and get more power. And so it's what the words mean and how they're interpreted and understood too.
Yeah.
I have to say, Timothy was very appreciative, courteous, helpful to me, on a human level, he gave me time and attention and wanted to learn about what was going on in Germany, and drove me to the train station when I left. And, he wasn't just a wild, irresponsible guy all the time.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Growing up and hearing the sensationalized, story of it, I had always assumed that he was just kind of partying with his students, and that's why he got fired. But it was actually it was Richard Alpert who had given it to they weren't allowed to give it to undergrad students; they were only allowed to give it to graduates. But he had given it to an undergrad, and that was the thing that. And it was actually funny because it was Andrew Weil who broke the story.
That's how he got fired. Yeah, silly. And I think of William James, who wrote the Varieties of Religious Experience back in 1902, Harvard professor. And there's a big social science building, beautiful building in his honor on the Harvard campus, the William James Center, And he was sniffing nitrous oxide and writing about his experiences. But somehow he's honored. And we don't have a Timothy Leary building yet. I don't know if we ever will or not, Yeah. But he's still kind of a source of embarrassment in the academic world rather than been a pioneer.
Yeah. Now, would you consider yourself to be a mystic?
I don't use that term. I think when the man on the street hears a mystic, they kind of picture a fortune teller with a turban talking about past lifetimes or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
The connotations of that term. If we can resurrect it, it's going to take a while, Yeah. So I'd rather be. I am a scholar of other states of consciousness. I am a human being trying to integrate and apply insights from the transcendental experiences that have occurred in my, wherever they were. Maybe they're not in space at all. I can't say they're in my brain, but I remember them, even if I was dead when they happened, We really get hung up in language trying to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm very attracted to the Zen Buddhist ox herding description of the spiritual life. When you're searching for meaning, searching for the spiritual, it's like looking for the footprints of the ox. And then you find the footprints and you pursue them, and the day comes when you see the ox. Okay? And then you approach it and you dialogue with the ox and struggle with it. And then the day comes when you ride upon the ox. And then the day comes, if you're lucky, where you become the ox. And then there's a day where there's no ox and no you. There's just a unity of consciousness.
Yeah.
But then the culmination of the spiritual quest is riding the ox back home from the mountaintop to the marketplace and being a compassionate presence in the everyday world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And I think when we talk about integrating, it's great to have these great epiphanies, and they certainly give us a nudge towards being a more loving, compassionate, tolerant presence in the world. But it takes work to really apply those insights and integrate them. and realize that it's not only those of us who have had profound experiences with psychedelics, but there are many people who have had mystical experiences that they treasure, and it might be the checkout clerk at the supermarket. It's not necessarily the effete professor or the bishop or someone.
Yeah.
That very ordinary people have these experiences, and often they don't talk about them because they're afraid they'll be judged as weird or psychotic, and it's very hard to find words to describe them. So they just treasure them in the silence of their own minds. But you'd be surprised how many enlightened, if not enlightened people who have at least glimpsed enlightenment or know that there is such a thing.
Yeah. No, yeah, Ram Dass talked about some of the studies that are done where, yeah, it's a remarkable, amount, not just like 1 or 2%, but like, 40, 50% of people that they interviewed that had one of these big experiences. Exactly what you say, they don't talk about it because they just know that people would think that they're crazy for it.
Yeah.
And one other surprising thing is then you ask those people that had these experiences whether they would like to do it again, and about 80% are like, I'm good. I don't know if I would want to, go through that again, even though it's as momentous as getting married or having a kid. That's the kind of experiences or the benchmarks that people use to describe it.
Yeah, you don't have to look to see if God is still there, or whatever your term is for ultimate reality. There, it's indelibly part of your life experience. Yeah.
And so speaking of God, you write in your book that when you have, say, an atheist that comes up to you, says, I don't believe in God, and you ask them, well, what do you mean by God? And they describe it to you.
What kind of God don't you believe in?
Yeah. And you find yourself agreeing with them. It's like, I don't believe in that kind of God either. And so, like when we hear the word God, I think the image that pops up in most people's heads is, the almost infantile image of what can be pejoratively called, the sky daddy.
Mm-hmm.
Some old white guy in a white robe with a long beard sitting outside the universe, judging us for every last thing we do. But
and maybe dodging jet planes.
But as I've studied world religions, I've realized that to me God is essentially a concept that, and you can make an argument similar to Anselm's ontological argument that essentially God is the greatest thing that we can think of. So with the earliest humans and the earliest forms of religion, you look at what humans had to contend with, and it was the natural world, the animals and plants that made up their lives. And so, of course, they divinize it, to a certain extent, that, out of that basic realization that even though us as individuals live and die over a relatively short time, 80 years is nothing in the grand scheme of the universe, but that, nature seems to be transcendent. It seems like it'll always be there. The sun is always going to rise and set. And so you look at the ancient Greeks and just over history, it just becomes kind of more and more abstract kind of principles behind everything. So you look at the Greeks, living in that rocky peninsula in the middle, the Mediterranean Sea, that depended so much on the rain and the ocean. It's no surprise that their top gods would become, Zeus and Poseidon. But what's incredible to me is that it's not just the outside forces of nature that become their gods, but also the inner forces of nature, emotions like love and fear, Eros and Pan, or even these altered states, like the god of the vine, Dionysus. And that's one thing that I feel like we've lost touch with. Nowadays we would say that I am mad, that you get drunk, whereas the Greeks would say that these states get you, you become possessed by these gods. And then again, over time it becomes, more and more abstract, in the Enlightenment, You have the deistic God, the watchmaker, becomes popular, which I would argue goes back even to the insights of like Plato and Pythagoras, and even in Judaism, Yahweh is of course the God of law and order and history, and so what to me what made the most sense was the kind of pantheistic view that when I really think about it, the greatest thing that I can imagine is the universe, because where outside of an infinite universe is there room for God to hide, and if God came before the universe, what came before God? So that pantheistic, that God is like the absolute or the one of Platonism, or the ground of being, like in Hinduism. That
Sometimes people make a distinction between pantheism and panentheism. Panentheism, that at the very origin of everything is this creative energy called love that we call God.
Yeah.
It's interesting, these transcendental experiences, the unity is approached often with closed eyes, kind of going deeper and deeper into an inner world, and poof, the unity happened. But it also happens with open eyes, where everything seems to break down into the dance of energy, of perception, or whatever. I think what Alfred North Whitehead was trying to express, of actual entities prehending one another, or whatever. But again, with the that ultimately all is one. All is one ultimate energy manifestation, which is very much like what we call animism, and we call that primitive.
Yeah.
But it's another conceptualization of it, really, that everything is alive. And if we look through the lens of modern physics, everything is moving, alive, energy. And it's independent of time and space and substance,
Yeah.
Pretty awesome. We hardly know how to think, or we can't get our language around it,
Yeah.
I want to see a good psychedelic research project done with quantum physicists who have the language to talk about this stuff a bit.
Now, unfortunately, it seems that there's a lot of, in certain denominations and pretty much every religion, they can take things very literally and dogmatically, and usually that's to the exclusion of science, because when you have a literal reading of these texts, and then you try to incorporate the scientific worldview, there are things that usually clash. But again, I do really believe that again, there aren't scientific, historical, literal truths in the Bible, that these are allegorical, mythological, spiritual truths. And when you come at it from that perspective, in reality, I really don't think that there is any conflict between scientific truths and spiritual truths. They're absolutely in harmony, and a lot of the real core stuff are confirmed. You look at the religious views of like Hinduism and Buddhism, which tells us that birth and death are illusions, and the only reason we're kind of caught in these cycles is because we're deluded, like you say, about the nature of reality. We feel like we're isolated, we're inside, that we're not connected to this wider reality. But it's and these are absolutely in harmony with scientific principles like the conservation of mass and energy. I mean, nothing will come of nothing, as the famous Greek saying goes, and that nothing is created nor destroyed, but that matter and energy are two sides of the same coin, and they're independent and constantly changing from one form to another. And so from that perspective, you can start to see, again, how death and birth are illusions that we're kind of caught in. But again, the way I've always seen it is I mean, first off, I mean, they say that every 7 years all the cells in your body have, you know, died and been replaced by new ones. And then also, I mean, we feel like we're individuals, but factually that's just wrong. You know, you have more bacterial cells in your being than human cells. So in reality, we're not individuals. We are environments. We are whole ecosystems. You know, and that actually, like, when you're eating, you're not really feeding yourself. You're feeding your gut bacteria, and then, you know, that feeds you.
Hey guys. Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, the atoms that pass through our being have theoretically been here since the beginning of time and will be there to the beginning of time. So, you know, it really does seem like we get there's many different levels of analysis that we can identify with, and for most people we're just kind of stuck at this certain lower level where we just think,
sure,
I'm in here and the world's out there, and when we die the light goes off, you know.
When I studied with Abe Maslow in 1966, he published his book, The Psychology of Science. And his thesis is basically there's kind of two kinds of science. There's science that limits itself to what can be easily controlled and measured. And then there's true science, which is on the frontiers of knowledge, creating new concepts, new language, encountering beauty and complexity. And of course, that's where the psychedelic frontier is, you know. But he wouldn't see it as anti-scientific or unscientific. This is the growing edge of science. And science is bumping into those realms that historically we have called sacred, you know. And you can choose your language in your religious frameworks, but it's part of reality that we're beginning to awaken more fully to. Yeah.
Yeah. And I tell you, I mean, one of the ways where I feel like people can kind of lose their way with these sort of experiences and kind of go a little crazy with it. You know, obviously, when you have such a powerful experience, first off, you can be a little overly enthusiastic about it. And that's certainly what I think turned everyone off in the 60s, you know. But at the same time, like, you know, I would definitely say that, you know, these substances, at least for me, have been an absolute godsend. And that is an under-exaggeration, not an over-exaggeration. You know, you can, to use these superlative language, it really only kind of barely scratches the surface of it. But where people can kind of lose their minds with it is that, you know, most of us were just so attached to our view of reality. And for most people nowadays is that secular materialistic view, you know, and which, you know, goes against the idealistic views you find in, you know, Platonism and Hinduism. So we're so attached to this one view, and then when people have these incredibly powerful experiences, it shows them the validity of these other planes of reality, existence, or consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. Then they switch their attachment. So where they're completely attached to this view, now they're completely attached to that view, and that's the real thing.
That's a stage of digestion, of assimilating and coming to terms with it. Sometimes it takes a few years to get a sense of balance after a profound experience, but I see that as part of the process of integrating. Yeah.
And so you hear from, you know, the Eastern religions that that the world isn't real, that it's an illusion, and some people kind of take that to the extreme, you know, kind of an almost nihilism, that the world doesn't even exist, or like a solipsism, that only my consciousness exists, everyone else is just a figment of my imagination. And what I feel like the real insight is that the same way science shows us that while all of the objects around us feel very solid and real, if we were actually look into it, they're mostly space, and they're all these vibrating energetic particles. that there is nothing kind of solid and stable like a rock at the core of it. But it's, of course, it's not that it doesn't exist, it just doesn't exist in the way that we commonly perceive it. And so, and the same truth kind of applies to these altered states. On one level, they are absolutely real because, they happen. You just, when you have these experiences, you cannot deny the validity of it. But at the same time, there is also that illusory, intangible aspect, the same way this world has that illusory aspect. And then that the integration part is realizing that again, these that the deepest truths often are kind of paradoxical, that things that on a certain level seem like they're completely opposed, like life and death, it seems like, or happiness and suffering, it seems like that suffering and death are the enemies of life and happiness. But really, it's like a coin, you cannot have one side without the other, that they're interdependent. And again, life is built on death, in terms of just, eating, it's like how many animals does the average person eat in a lifetime, and it's again, that the fundamental matter isn't born, isn't dies, it's just going, transforming from, one state to another through one being, to another. But what do you think about, all that?
Wow. I think you ought to teach philosophy. Very much in agreement. Funny, I don't talk about altered states anymore. I talk about alternate states. That there are different ways of experiencing that have their own validity to them. It's not just a change of this one, I have some concern, people who listen to this, if they're thinking about trying a psychedelic, I hope they're educated enough not to just throw a drug in their mouth to see what will happen. That's my metaphor. That's like jumping on skis and starting downhill when you've never gone skiing before. It's kind of a stupid thing to do, that there is a cache of knowledge about how to navigate safely in these inner worlds and how to be interpersonally grounded and safe when you receive a psychedelic. And so much more than involved than the drug itself. The drug opens the door, unlocks the door, gives an opportunity, presents a landscape perhaps, but what you do, how you respond to that, depends on your ability to choose to trust, your interpersonal support, where you are in life, and sometimes you have to go through suffering as part of the journey. That's not a bad trip. That's intensive psychotherapy, but you got to be ready for it.
No, and I do want to say for YouTube's sake that I'm certainly not a doctor, and of course none of this is medical advice. We're not advocating that people go out and find this or break the law or anything, and that it really is highly important to have guidance, support, to talk to your doctor. For instance, Abraham Maslow, it is very important to know that, if you have a heart condition or some underlying thing, that it can be exasperated by these states, and that the importance of set and setting, and that what I would say that while they are incredibly safe if if you're not prone to psychosis or schizophrenia, those are kind of the two caveats. If you have a history of that in your family, probably should stay away from it. But otherwise, for healthy, well-adjusted people, it's as safe as driving a car. If you don't know what you're doing, you just get behind the wheel, never went to driving school, you're going to get into an accident. But if you prepare, correctly, again, with, set and setting, these are, profoundly safe, and that while you can have, the in public awareness, or at least in these sort of circles, the language has certainly changed from bad trips to challenging, trips.
That's right.
Which I would definitely agree with, and for me, I would say about honestly, I have had both. That there is such a thing as a bad trip, but what produces that is when you fight it. It's not necessarily that something scary comes up. It's when you try running out the door, and that when you look it in the face and you ask, why are you in my mind? What do you represent? That's when it opens up to you, these incredible insights, which can be, incredibly transformative and healing.
Yeah, the metaphor of the ayahuasca religions. What do you do if you see the great anaconda serpent,
It's a jump down its throat, right?
Yeah, you jump into his mouth and look out through his eyes. Yeah. You become your Kundalini, your Shakti, your Elan Vital. Why would you run from it?
Yeah.
And if you run from it, it's going to chase you and you're going to get panicked and paranoid. That's what we call a bad trip,
Yeah, speaking of, you actually had with a client pretty much exactly this experience you read about in your book, where he saw a terrifying snake in the chair, and he actually tried running out the door, and you had to kind of tackle him and be like, "Hey, look at it." And when he did look at it, he realized that the snake represented the constricting presence of his mother in his life, and which of course opened up the experience for him. And that's just it's incredible. Some of the stories you have. For instance, another incredible one was someone who had a lot of surgery done on their legs, which of course is done under anesthesia. You're unconscious during it, or you think you're unconscious. But in the trip, it brought him down to those parts of his body and really exposed him to the trauma and suffering that his legs had endured and had supported him through, and that all of that physical trauma was still within him, even though he didn't consciously experience it. His body experienced it, and that completely opened up to him in the experience.
Yeah, the potential of these drugs to accelerate psychotherapy is immense. It's really a significant frontier in psychiatry. Psychiatry has almost lost touch with the intelligence, the beauty, the richness of the human mind. We've been so thinking about chemical, psychopharmacological approaches that we've lost the experiential dimension. Carl Jung and the archetypes, and I think a lot of psychiatrists graduating these days haven't even heard the word archetype. They don't know what it is, much less having approached one and dialogued with it, So there are implications for medicine, psychotherapy especially, but also, as I outlined in my book, implications for education and for religion. And the religious scholarship community is finally now beginning to really wake up to the psychedelic frontier. And it'd be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Yeah. Now, I do think that we would be remiss not to explore, some of the risks of these, substances, more deeply. So, going back to that, a lot of people, especially that don't have much knowledge or experience with these substances, they look at it and first it's a drug, first off. And they assume that it's used in similar ways that most drugs are used. I mean, you look at alcohol, opiates, cannabis, and most people use it to shut up the uncomfortable feelings, to avoid the uncomfortable realities of their life. And I think one thing that anyone who takes these, substances realizes that it's a pretty awful way of trying to escape, those things.
It takes you right into the heart of what you're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
It doesn't take you away from it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you use the metaphor of it's like you got to be ready to go into the basement of your life and not just go into it, but say like, all right, here I come, and really shine a light into the dark corners. And,
I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to live with less anxiety and depression and more creativity. This is a way of developing, nurturing my own mind. And I think everyone has a right to explore their own minds. If this is a tool that can help us explore our minds, it should be available legally.
Yeah.
But it needs to be, people need to know how to use it wisely. But, think of all the other things we do in life that have risks, and the government doesn't legislate them.
Yeah.
You don't have to get a permit to go skiing, but you can harm yourself if you don't do it right.
Yeah.
Or scuba diving or whatever,
Yeah.
And it's similar with, you need to learn about it and see if this is right for you at this point, how much risk there may be, and do you choose to accept that degree of risk? How can you minimize the risk?
Yeah. No, I love what Timothy Leary said, that the only dangerous thing is human ignorance.
Yeah.
And I would say that it's not just important to educate yourself, to be prepared for the experience, to be aware of what's possible, but also it is so important to have someone who has experience with these, that knows what's possible, knows what to expect to guide you. You really do need a shaman or a trip sitter or something like that, because it's just, you can get into pretty rocky waters, by yourself, and just having that presence of someone else is such just a stabilizing force, and can really allow you to let go and be open to the experience. But no, I like what you say in your book, that as we were saying, quote, "If one simply wants delightful escape from the pressures of life, psychedelic substances are very poor choices. Psychological and spiritual growth is indeed serious and sometimes gut-wrenching business." And that, not only is it serious business, the intent to learn and to grow personally and spiritually appears to be critical if safety and benefit are desired. The intent to merely get high or have fun entails definite risks. And that another image you have for it, for such unwise use of entheogens, is like playing marbles with diamonds. But also the thing I think is incredible is that the metaphors that you use in your book are ones that, even if I don't have the same metaphors, I've kind of come to roughly the same thing. I mean, first off, it's kind of common knowledge that shrooms gives you the trip you need, not necessarily the one you want.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of going into the basement, the way I tell people is like, unless you're ready to roll up your sleeves and get into, go clean your bathroom and or clean out your closet and stuff, because like everyone has that closet where you just kind of shove all your shit in and just kind of it all starts piling up. And if you're not willing to go in there and dig through, the refuse of your life, if you're just someone who kind of sweeps everything under the rug, it's going to come out one way or another. And how you handle it is really reflective of your attitude, going into it.
Yeah.
But
takes courage to grow, be open. But it gives life meaning. Yeah.
No, and it's funny. I actually told you that I haven't told my audience yet, but I've been a Buddhist for about 3 years now. I've started flirting with the philosophy of it about around 19, but I didn't consider myself to be a Buddhist. But after some of my most incredible experiences I've had, and again just through the study of it and just seeing how much the truth of it isn't just abstract truths that are nice and pretty to think about, but they're just absolutely applicable to every aspect of life. And so recently, I took some, Buddhist vows, and my teacher said to me that walking this path takes courage, and yeah, and it definitely does, whichever way you're doing it, to explore consciousness, to explore your own inner life, this way, it does take a lot of courage, not just to face the experience, but also in terms of how, frowned this is upon in day-to-day life. I definitely have no illusion that, since I haven't really talked about this stuff too much on my channel, that when I put up, considering that so far it's just been pretty dry history and philosophy, it's like I'm gonna lose some people, but I'm willing to take the risk just because I recognize the importance of this, not just in my own life, but how important it's been for my friends and family and stuff, how life, everyone that I know that has been willing, has the courage to explore, alternate states. It is, one of the most valuable things, and one of the most just transformative and, healing experiences you could have. Again, these, from the outside looking in, it's, from the beginning, it was these states were seen as a reflection of neurosis, pathology, a misfiring of neurons sort of thing, hallucinations and all that. But you have a quote that, regardless of one's philosophical assumptions or theory of the relation of the brain to human consciousness, it is striking that cancer patients who experience mystical consciousness usually tend to behave in mature, centered ways afterwards, to live the time that remains as fully and genuinely as possible, and not uncommonly communicate with family members in ways that are reconciling, an aspect of this research that has profound relevance for preventative medicine. Many would see such behavior as evidence, not of impairment or pathology, but of health, maturity, and spiritual development. I wonder, where would you say that comes from, this potential for healing and for deeper insight? Because again, these experiences, I don't think, are within the chemicals, they're within us. So what about having that experience produces these changes, for people?
Well, if consciousness is opened broadly enough, and you have access to the deeper, some people call it the inner healing intelligence, the love of God that reconciles, the inner wisdom, call it what you will, but you discover that something is coming to you from the depths of the psyche, and you kind of humbly participate in it, receive it, and we call that healing or resolution of psychological conflicts, or awakening. Your awakening isn't a on-off switch, it's a very gradual process of more light, more light, more light, more light, more light over time, and you wake up a little bit more. And a psychiatrist philosopher who was my intellectual companion throughout much of my academic work was Karl Jaspers, a German existentialist. And over he's saying that we are more than we know or ever can know of ourselves, that there really, really is an incredible mystery within the mind, the consciousness, the being of each of us. And we often go through life not aware that these other dimensions of being are there, We're kind of like robots, getting out of bed and going to work and eating and going back to bed, Yeah. But the human potential is infinitely greater. And it's no accident, I think, that people like Steve Jobs and Carrie Mulligan and, you know, kind of Nobel Prize winners in genetics attribute some of their creativity to their psychedelic experiences. That they not only have felt better, but they've really had creative insights that they've been able to come back and implement in the world. And of course, lots of people have taken psychedelics and haven't created anything yet. So it's more than the psychedelics. But it's worth thinking that there are resources within us that we tend to ignore or devalue. And when they become activated, people live more fully. The cancer patient, typically, who has a transcendental glimpse during the action of a psychedelic, will talk about living until he dies, you know, being thankful for each present moment. And he may say, I've lost a fear of death. I'm kind of curious about it instead of frightened by it. But there's no urge to speed up the death.
Yeah.
The present moment, as in Buddhism, opens up that in the middle of the present moment is a portal to the eternal. It's not just before we're born and after we die. Here and now, here and now. Wake up, wake up. You are a spiritual being. You know? Teilhard de Chardin says we're all spiritual beings having physical experiences right now. And you can see where he's coming from. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, going back to, like you said, obviously, you know, psychedelics aren't the thing that produces the Steve Jobs of the world, you know, and similarly, Houston Smith has said that obviously religious experiences do not necessarily translate to
religious lives.
Yeah. And
states of consciousness and traits of behavior.
Yeah. And as, you know, you say in your book, and pretty much anyone I think that works with these substances realizes is that they are not, while they can be incredibly useful for helping reduce our anxiety and depression and that sort of thing. They are not, you know, magic bullets and cure-alls that psychedelics will not do the work for you. They will just show you the work that needs to be done, you know, or it shows you, you know, how things could be if you could actually kind of stabilize that thing. But as we discussed, you know, most people when they have this experience, they're in no rush to kind of embrace it. You know, we get comfortable in our daily lives and our limited, you know, views of like self-identification, and we're very comfortable in going back to those roles. Sorry. But speaking of, you know, that one of the insights that I feel like most people get out of these experiences is, we have a very limited view of not just reality, but of ourselves. You know, we fall into very specific roles, and then we tend to think that that's all we are. But when you look at it, you know, we really play many roles in a life. You know, whether it's a son or a daughter, or eventually, you know, a mother or father, you know, a student, a worker, you know, a lover, sometimes a fighter. You know, that we have all of these different dimensions of our personality, and like Jung recognized, you know, the thing that makes a balanced, individuated person is incorporating all of these different parts of our aspect, incorporating the anima and the animus, the shadow and stuff. And it's whereas again, you know, the way that most people deal with this stuff is a kind of repression. You know, you see an uncomfortable side of yourself, and you want to just push it away and say that it doesn't exist. And that's what I feel like results in for the most part, a lot of people's, pathologies, mental illness and stuff is that repression of different aspects, which leads me to, it's really a tragedy with our current paradigm of medicine, because the way I see it is all of these, again, the same way we look at death as the enemy of life, we look at these uncomfortable emotions, anxiety, depression, shame, fear, and we just want to find a way to shut it up. And that seems to be the current paradigm of medical intervention is you go to the doctor and they're going to give you a benzodiazepine or an SSRI to turn off those chemical signals, which I found is the complete opposite of what you want to do. What you want to do is the same way in the psychedelic experience, diving into these uncomfortable states. You want to dive into the emotions and understand what it is there to tell you. Because, I absolutely believe that they serve evolutionary purposes. For instance, it's really no surprise when you look at it, why are artists so depressed, or why are depressed people so creative? And because that's the solution. Mm-hmm. That essentially the reason that depression works is you're in a bad situation, and that's your heart telling you, like, hey, this isn't working out, this isn't right, you need to do something. And so, like, the image that I would use is, say you're a farmer and every year after year you're having shitty harvest, that would be depressing. Mm-hmm. You want to grow more, crops to sustain your family. So what happens? You hunker down, you get introverted, or you turn inside and you start, ruminating a lot about your issues, sometimes to a state that it does become a kind of disease when you're ruminating too much about it and you can't escape it. That's really where depression becomes a mental illness for people. But then you usually get a lot of insight. The incredible thing is, while people may have a distorted view of their own world, it's surprising. They've done studies that depressed people actually usually have a lot clearer insight into maybe not their own reality, but reality as a whole. When they're looking at something that they aren't as so personally identified with, they do have a clearer view of reality, and so it leads to not just insights but creativity, because that's what it's for. You're supposed to find these insights so that you can have a creative solution to your issue. But so yeah, what do you think about the current paradigm of medicine, and how the current solution does seem to be to just, take these pills for the rest of your life so that you don't feel those emotions, instead of, exploring it, through psychotherapy and, these other alternate options, which now are becoming, more dominant.
Well, there may always be people who want to just feel better, just turn off the pain, and they're not interested in insight or meaning, Yeah. And if there's a pill they can take that makes them feel better, that doesn't cause great harm, why not? Personally, I see that as like going through the art museum with a blindfold on. Why would you want to do that? That the process of human growth and development can be very meaningful and exciting and colorful, and sure, it's got its scary moments, but maybe it makes life interesting, it's makes you want to get out of bed in the morning and stretch and grow, Yeah. And that there's so much for each of us to discover and develop and nurture and learn, I'm a strong believer in valuing the suffering and exploring it and finding meaning in it.
Yeah.
And modern psychiatry could wake up to include more of that,
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be formal psychoanalysis of 4 days a week for 7 years,
Yeah.
The psychedelics wisely used can profoundly accelerate the process of resolution of childhood trauma, and the discovery of creative possibilities within each of us. You know?
And yeah, so speaking of suffering, on the one hand, you've obviously had a very fortunate life, but that obviously also doesn't mean that you've been insulated from the tragedies of life. I mean, for instance, of course, losing your friend, Walter Pankey at a very young, just that his death was certainly premature and probably very unexpected, and then of course, losing your first wife to cancer. And then also, I mean, watching your career, which I assume you had a lot of hope for, kind of fizzle out into nothing. So I'm sure I already kind of know the answer to this question, but I'm wondering, did that shake your faith, or was it your faith that got you through those things?
Probably the latter.
Yeah.
Curiosity about how life is unfolding. When we give someone a psychedelic, the mantra we use most frequently is to say to yourself, if you're wondering, what should I do now? Trust, let go, be open. So when I've experienced these unexpected roadblocks in life or tragedies, I think I say to myself, trust, let go, be open. See how life develops from this point,
Yeah.
And yeah, I've had my share of tragedy and struggle and pain. Quite a few things you didn't mention, but I'm thankful to be alive, and having what the Buddhists call one precious human life.
Yeah. And no, I'm sure you agree that one of the things I found is that again, the suffering in life is not in opposition to the meaning of life. That in fact that it wouldn't be as meaningful if there wasn't something at stake. And that
precisely. I mean, we generally think of minor music as more expressive than major music.
Yeah.
The magnificent symphony includes dissonance and struggle, and then the harmony breaks through, like it's part of the beauty of it all.
No, yeah, as soon as you said music, that was exactly what I was going to say, is that dissonance is as important for music as harmony, because what really great music is all about is the tension and then release of that tension.
That's right.
You can't have the release,
the process,
without the tension.
The struggle, the dance of Shiva. Scary 1 minute, joyful the next. Destroying, creating.
Yeah.
Eternal.
No, and it's really what makes life precious, that we wouldn't value it as much if,
that's right.
Again, if there wasn't something at stake.
Yeah.
Let me see if there's anything else I'd like to...
Well, you really worked to prepare for this.
Yeah. No, I reread the book. I found some interviews you did, But yeah, no...
That book is out in 10 languages now.
Nice.
It seems to have a life of its own out there.
No, it's I tell you, when it comes from psychedelics, I've definitely been of the belief that reading about water won't get you wet, sort of thing. So while I've studied a lot of history, spiritual texts, and philosophy, in terms of psychedelic literature, I never got into it too much. After a certain point, I did start, reading into it more, but I certainly was never really interested by the Terence McKenna's, and I don't really recommend his kind of writings to people. But in terms of if I had to pick one book to kind of give people a good overview of the potential, the what's there here, is it has been your book. It's like that's the number one I recommend to friends and stuff. It's really a fantastic book, and for anyone listening, should definitely go out and buy it. But because yeah, it's really worth reading. But no, and I tell you, yeah, just what's really kind of sad to me about this whole thing is, yeah, growing up in a secular materialist household and with that sort of mindset, it's puts you in a very isolated position. You're completely disconnected from the vast majority of people that have either had some kind of spiritual experience or just any kind of spiritual belief. You just think that, and I certainly did, that, anyone that have had any kind of experience or any sort of belief is either ignorant or gullible or, stupid or something like that, or crazy, But now, after exploring, the literature and having a couple experiences myself that have shown me the validity of it, you absolutely see that if anyone was crazy or sick, even, it was me before these sort of experiences, because not just, with the isolation from other people, but from own aspects of your own consciousness. But,
well, there are many people who aren't attuned to any particular form of institutional religion, but they do love one another. They see beauty in the world. They appreciate art and struggle, and they can dance, and so much is what we mean by our words.
yeah.
They would say, well, I'm not religious. I might look at them and think they are pretty religious. They're just not expressing it in the language of a particular Jewish, Islamic, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu system.
Yeah. But also, the pursuit of science, can absolutely be as much a spiritual pursuit as anything. And if part of religion is opening us up to the mystery and just the wonder of life, that you absolutely can find the same exact things through, studying the universe and just looking up the stars and wondering,
I mean, how can anyone lie on your back and look up at the Milky Way and not feel a sense of awe?
Yeah.
That we're these beings with a short lifespan, less than 100 years, on this little planet with molten metal beneath our feet, spinning around the sun at a ridiculous speed. And the sun is just an average star in one of countless galaxies. If you take that stuff seriously, which supposedly is science, how can you not feel a sense of awe and reverence?
Yeah.
It's a miracle that we are at all. Good old Schelling. Why is there something and not nothing?
Yeah.
We are. Yeah. And we don't even know what we are.
Yeah. No, speaking of people's, skepticism towards like organized forms of religion, it's like I'm just as skeptical of it as anyone else. Obviously, anyone can see the harm that again, the more dogmatic, literal forms of organized religion can be. But at the same time, absolutely, man does not live by bread alone, and that, spirituality is more of an inner thing than anything.
Yeah.
The same way that the founding fathers, like Jefferson, he had his own version of the Gospels where he crossed out all the magical miracle stuff. But even still, he did have a deep sense of spirituality and that belief that it's important for us, more so as a personal thing, that it is a deeply personal thing, that everyone has their own, or should develop their own personal sense of spirituality.
And their own language, in the old metaphor of the guru pointing at the infinite galaxies, and the disciples are all gathered around studying his finger. No, look where the guru is pointing. Don't just study his finger and be true to it.
No, yeah, that's what they say that the Buddha is only the finger pointing at the moon. It's not the moon itself.
That's right. And there is a Buddha within each of us. The Buddha is the one who woke up.
Yeah.
And we could all wake up more fully. Yeah.
And so that's the thing. It's like, as a Buddhist, I really don't have a lot of use for the concept of God. I feel like that kind of gets people more confused than it gets them in touch with that deeper sense of reality. But at the same time, I absolutely do see the beauty and truth of it as a metaphor, as a concept. Again, you can kind of take it the wrong way when you take it too literally.
Yeah.
But that, again, these are metaphors. These are ways of mapping out the territory, that the map isn't the territory, but that at the end of the day, everyone needs a map to guide themselves.
Yes.
And it doesn't really necessarily matter if you have the perfect map. You really just need a map, to guide yourself. But no, I mean, like, one of the things that tells me that, or is a signal to me of the validity of my own spiritual experiences, is not just that it sent me on my own, path in life and helped me discover it. And I'm absolutely convinced that I've, found what is right for me and my own, truth. It has also given me a deep respect for everyone's path and everyone's truth. And so, while I encourage people to explore, not just my own personal religion, but all the religions, to not limit yourself in any way, to really explore and, find out what is your path, what is your truth, and to honor it, and I do really think it's so incredibly important to not just honor your own path, but to honor everyone's.
Right. To really value diversity.
Yeah.
What a privilege it is to meet someone with a different language, a different culture, a different set of categories of thought, build bridges of understanding and appreciation. It enriches life.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, when you come down to the core ethical teachings of everything from the Sermon on the Mount to, what the Buddha taught, they're absolutely not in harmony. That, like, as people say, that the theologians of the world may quarrel a lot, but the saints are absolutely in agreement.
The mystics get along just fine with one another.
Yeah. And going back to my question of whether or not you're a mystic, I definitely understand why you're hesitant to use the term, but when you think of it as simply someone who pursues the mystical experience, that sees the validity of it and the importance, and seeks it out. Yeah,
and it's not just having the mystical experience, like my possession, in fact, you can't even have it. You die when it happens. You're not even there, but you discover it in your memory banks afterwards somehow. It's very hard to put into language, But it's living out of those insights of love, not as just a mushy human emotion, but an intelligent energy, creative energy in the world, of the worth of every human being, the beauty of the natural world, on and on and on. And integrating those insights are gradual. I think I kill less bugs than I used to, but I still kill one every now and then, but if I can capture it and let it outside, why not? It's an incredible little critter if you look at it carefully.
But
is there anything we haven't talked about?
Yeah, we're just scratching the surface of everything I would really love to talk about. But no, to wrap things up, I want to go back to what you talked about, not just becoming the ox or riding the ox, but riding it back into town. That you do need to not just have, it's not just important to have the experience, but to integrate it into your personal life. And really what that, hearing you talk about that really reminds me of is the insight that Joseph Campbell reached of the hero's journey, that again, all of the different stories represent this basic core human experience of what makes someone the hero is not just going from the known world to the unknown world, but then bringing back, the treasure to and bringing it into your daily life and bringing it, to the community. And
each of your listeners is a hero on a journey. Nice to think of that. This is my journey through one particular human life. Let's do it well.
Anything else you would like to say?
Just thank you for taking the time to come and talk to me. Carry the ball.
It's a privilege and an honor.
Yeah.
But thank you.
I remember years ago when 60 Minutes was making a documentary at Spring Grove of our work with cancer patients. And this woman was, interviewing me, just like you are. And actually, you'd enjoy it. In those days, there were cables going down the hallway and light man and sound man and all this, big equipment, And then when the interview was almost over, she just switched her style completely and said, "What's going on here, Dr. Richards? We don't see any change really going on in these patients. What are you people up to?" I remember I just kept my cool and stayed centered, and they never used the footage, But it's almost like a part of the game that gets played, But I know you wouldn't do that to me.